It's my first time in Lebanon, so that's amazing to see and all of you here. So I was asked to come to the code stage and do like a Q&A. I'm going to hold a presentation later, but I don't have a presentation for this event. My background is in startups. I'm a technology guy. I've done a couple of startups. I was the CTO at Spotify. I co-founded kind of a mobile offers app called Wrap, and I've done a few other startups. So. But I don't have a presentation for this slot, so I'm hoping you have questions, because as far as I know, this is a Q&A. Does anyone have microphones for the audience? No microphones?
Hallo. Gestern habe ich gesehen, dass Sie sprechen Deutsch.
Ein bisschen,
ja. But I'm going to ask my question in English. Why exactly did you leave Spotify? Like, what happened?
Sure. So Spotify is actually quite an old company. It's 10 years this year. It was started in August 2006, and I was there for the first 3.5 years. So the company was already, like, by the standards I knew, quite big when I left. We were like 150 employees, and now it's like 2,000. So it's huge now. But I think it was pretty big, and I wanted to start another company. I wanted to go back to those early days of building things where you're really like everyone's working as one team. Spotify starting to get too like political, too much organizational issues. I like small companies. I like the early phase of startups.
But don't you regret it?
No, never, not at all. No, why?
Because I mean, like Spotify is becoming like a global news music streaming.
Right. So what you're saying is Spotify has become a globally used music stream. But that's fine, right? They were able, like, I built the foundation for that, and then people could kind of take that and run, and it's become a great company. I'd rather be part of building new things.
Oh, so you don't care about fame?
No, not that way. No. Plus, I still get invited to events like this, right? So get best of both worlds.
I'm just curious to know, do you use Spotify or not?
Yeah, it's still the best music service by far. It's not available here, I believe, though. But yeah, it's a shame. It's in 60 markets now, so like they've done a good job rolling it out globally. But it takes a long time to get all those music licenses and like local ad sales and all that set up. So it takes time. There's one over here.
What did it feel like when you wrote the first line for Spotify?
So I doubt that it was actually me who wrote the very first line of code. I did. So I unfortunately I haven't been like coding professionally for quite a long time. My first job in startups was as a developer, but then even there, that was before Spotify. Even there, quickly I kind of made transition into more of a management role. I did write a little bit of code for Spotify, but that was more out of like necessity. It was like the night before we were supposed to launch like the first public beta. So this was, I believe, in May 2007. And back then we didn't have mobile apps. It was all desktop, and we didn't have any. It wasn't anything like the App Store for the desktop or the whatever the equivalent is in the Windows world. So you had to do like all your installations and upgrades of your apps yourself. So all the apps used to kind of have their own way to auto update. And that's kind of a critical piece of it, because if you mess that up, if you release a new version of your app, or the first version in this case, and you mess up like the update process, then there's no way to kind of fix that, because then you can't release an update. So that's very critical. And we also didn't want anyone to be able to use that as a vector to spread malware, because even though Spotify was tiny at this point, didn't even exist really. We assumed, we hoped that it was going to get very big. I mean, now it has like, 60, 70 million users. So that's like tens of millions of people who are running our software. And if someone was able to kind of inject malware into that update stream, then they would have a massive botnet. So we didn't want that. So we had a system, or we were planning to have a system to cryptographically sign the new versions of Spotify, so that the installed version of Spotify could verify that the update that the system the server is sending to it is from us. It's valid. But the night before we're supposed to launch, we realized that we hadn't quite written the software to sign those updates. So yeah, that's what I did, like the night before launch. That's probably the last piece of code I wrote at Spotify.
Have you heard of Anghami? Anghami is like Spotify but for the Middle East. Do you think if Spotify, like if they put their app in the Middle East and North Africa market, can they compete with Anghami? Like,
So from what I heard yesterday, actually, they have an exclusive deal with like the largest rights holder for Arabic music in the region, and yeah, of course, that's like a big. I mean, sure, Spotify would have the international catalog, but you also need local music, so that would be difficult for Spotify or anyone else coming in. I don't know if Apple Music is here. I suppose Apple Music is here. Yeah. So do they have that catalog? Do you know? They do. Okay. Well, if they can get it, probably Spotify can get it. So I mean, to kind of take a step back and answer kind of your question, but not necessarily specifically for the region. I think it's a little bit unfortunate what's happening in the industry, where Apple Music and Tidal and other players are trying to compete not by having a better product, but by having exclusive deals with artists. So they're trying to lure over users from Spotify by having exclusives, and I think that's unfortunate because if that's, I mean, of course Spotify will counter that by trying to get its own exclusives and so on, but if that's what the services are competing on, rather than the best product, then the losers will be the customers, because ultimately you'll have a fragmented music industry, a little bit like Netflix and HBO and all the other video or movie streaming services, where you have to choose your service not based on who has the best product, but based on who has the content you want. And I think they should compete on product, not on content. So I think the direction the industry is going in is unfortunate.
Are you currently looking for new projects?
Not operational roles. I do a little bit of investing. I do a little bit of angel investing, and I do a lot of like consulting for larger companies for investors. But yeah, no, not operational roles. No. Wait, there's a guy in the back.
Thank you. Recent claims that Apple's planning to reduce the cost of Apple Music. So based on your experience with the Spotify management and leadership team, how do you think they might be able to tackle such thing? Because Apple Music's kind of integrated through the iOS instead of an external application.
Yeah, so Apple Music has like a great advantage on the iPhone. They have an amazing distribution channel. Obviously, it's pre-installed. Still, despite that, they haven't really been able to. I mean, I don't think Apple Music is a success. They haven't. I mean, Spotify is still much bigger, even though Apple Music has this massive like company distribution channel war chest behind it. Because I think Spotify is a better product, and it has the free service, which Apple Music doesn't. Now, of course, they can use that money to subsidize the price potentially, or they might be able to negotiate better deals with the rights holders, with the labels. They can reduce cost. I think Spotify would love to reduce cost. It's not really up to Spotify whether the company can do that or not. It's up to the labels, because like the cost of the licenses, like the royalties, is roughly 70% of the revenue. So that's like where most of the money is going. So if they agree, perhaps in new markets or as customer acquisition, maybe for new users, whatever, right? If they agree to a lower price point, then Spotify would love that.
How do artists make money if they can just stream Spotify while just like monthly subscription?
I mean, they make tons of money on Spotify. Spotify has paid out $5 billion to rights holders so far. So the question is like how much of that money ends up with the artists, and that's Spotify and other streaming services often get blamed for not paying artists enough. And like one question is like, what is enough? I mean, they're paying what the market will bear. If Spotify doubled the price, I think a lot of people would cancel their subscription. So the question is, how much are we actually willing to pay for music? But the other question is, what are the deals between the artists and the labels? And if Spotify has paid out $5 billion to the rights holders, meaning the labels and the publishers, and artists aren't really getting their whatever is a fair share of that, then that's really a problem between the artists and the labels. It's not something that Spotify or any other streaming service can influence, unfortunately.
Have you heard of Grooveshark? They had the same streaming services that you had, but they got banned on the internet for doing some mistakes, some copywriting mistakes. So how did you guys avoid those mistakes? Like, did you have any copywriting issue?
Right. So I wouldn't say I wouldn't say Grooveshark was the same service. I think even the user experience was a lot worse. But yeah, as you say, they got not necessarily banned from the internet, but they got shut down by lawsuits because they didn't have the licenses to do what they did. They hadn't signed up the licenses from the labels, so Spotify did that. So that's how Spotify avoided that. Am I missing any questions in the back? Yeah, there's one there.
Thank you. I would like to know what is the technology stack behind the Spotify, and maybe did you guys face any scalability issues at the beginning that you had to switch stacks or do something like that?
Yeah. Yes, we did. The original technology stack behind Spotify was for the backend system. Obviously, the clients are written in whatever framework is the right one for each platform. But the backend was it's all sitting on Linux. No surprise there. Most of the code was written in Python. Performance critical parts were written in C or C++. For the most part. Some exceptions, but that was the majority of the code base. Over time, Spotify has transitioned away. There's still a lot of Python and C code there, but like it has transitioned away from both Python and C to more and more Java. I think a reason of that is twofold. One, it's sort of, I guess Java kind of sits in between Python and C in terms of being, relatively high performing and sort of like high level compared to C at least. So it's the best of both worlds or the worst of both worlds, depending on your standpoint. But I think primarily it's just easier to hire developers who know it. Like people are really good C developers today. It's like hard to find because people don't really learn that anymore. People don't have to code in like that low level of a language anymore. So yeah. One more.
I'm asking a lot of questions today. I'm sorry.
Oh, great.
What I wanted to ask. Yeah. First, while developing Spotify, did you had any competitors? Like, were there any competitors, and how did you overtake them?
Okay, good question. There were competitors. So yeah, often like Spotify is viewed as like the first music streaming service. Actually, we weren't. I think we were the first one, at least the first major one outside of the U.S. But there were competitors in the U.S. that were more or less doing what Spotify was doing. There was Rhapsody, which was eventually spun out of Real Media. So do you remember like Real, the streaming app from like the 90s? Yeah. Yeah, it was the first like music and eventually video streaming service that was big online. Initially was just a software product, so they didn't have any content of their own. They licensed it to other media companies who wanted to stream audio or video online. But it also gave like streaming kind of a bad name, I think, because the technology wasn't very good. So you'd always was always like buffering for a long time before anything started. So that was exactly what we wanted to avoid with Spotify. The other company that was around that I remember was the Napster, not the Napster file sharing service, but eventually after Napster got shut down, the brand was repurposed for a paid music streaming service. So those two were around. None of them were in Europe where we started. And I think the reason Spotify won was it was like 100% focused on what we were doing. So Rhapsody was sort of a side project for Real Media. They were making their real money from licensing their software. And B, it was just a better product. So as I said, like streaming experience online before Spotify was for most people a bad experience. So that's like when we built Spotify, one of the key things we stressed was that it had to be fast. It had to be like super snappy. The experience should be comparable to having the music locally on your own hard drive. So the aim we had was every stream should start within 200 milliseconds, because if you're below that threshold, it feels instant. And of course, like sometimes, especially on wireless networks, you'll just have latency that's worse than that, and then there's nothing you can do. But at least our backend system shouldn't add significantly to that delay. So there was a lot of focus on speed.
How do you manage to compress those files while still keeping the high quality of the music?
So this may have changed, but in at least in the early days, and I know it has changed for sure for some of the mobile streams, but at least in the early days and for the desktop applications, we used Ogg Vorbis, which is an open source codec. Primary reason for using that wasn't so much. I mean, it performed somewhat better than like MP3 and some other codecs, but it wasn't primarily for quality. It was primarily because it was a patent-free open source implementation, so it was cheaper. We didn't have to get patent licenses to use it. But even in the early days when I was still there, we also used AAC for some of the mobile streams so that we could make use of hardware decoders on the phones. Because at that time, phones were a lot less powerful than today. So if you could offload anything to like specific hardware, that was great. It would also save battery on the phone.
How do you see the future of the music industry? Will any servers take over the entire online music industry, or would you support new online music startups?
I don't think it's a winner like takes it all market because the network effects are pretty weak. If you compare it to like Facebook, a social network, then the network's effects are really, really strong. So if you want to be on the network where all your friends are, the more people are on the network, the higher the value of the network. Same for, let's say, like an online classifieds, that sort of like any kind of marketplace. There's strong network effects. The sellers want to be where the buyers are. The buyers are going to go where the sellers are. Spotify's tried to make music like more social, and many other players have tried to build like social layers on top of music. I don't think anyone has succeeded there. I think people assume music is much more social than it really is. I think music is pretty much like a single player experience. Sure, we like share playlists and go to parties and like go to concerts together, but like listening to music on your phone or computer, that's pretty much a single player experience. So there are very little network effects. So there's no reason to assume why there should be like a winner takes it all. So I think there will definitely be like, in every market there will be a handful of players, and there's probably going to be a few big global ones like Spotify, Apple Music, maybe one more, and then there will be local ones in each region. I think that's how it's going to look. Another reason to assume that there isn't going to be like a one big player owning the market is because the labels want to be able to control, like the labels want there to be competition. So if one gets too big, I think they're going to give better licenses to the competitors and try to make sure there's more than one winner that way.
Yeah, hello. Do you think Spotify is perfect or is missing a few things?
No, nothing is perfect. Spotify is very far from perfect. That's why they have like 700-800 developers now trying to make the product better.
What do you think it needs?
I mean, to me personally, I would actually say it might need less things rather than more things. I kind of like I think Spotify has gotten, there's like a lot of features have been added to the product and not enough features have been taken away. So I think it's gotten like harder to use, especially for new users. This was, so the first question was like why I left Spotify. One of the reasons was kind of a diverging view on product strategy. So I wanted the Spotify core, like the application that we had to be very small and simple. To do just the very basics. And then I wanted us to have an open API for any other music service who wanted to build something else on top of the Spotify streaming backend, the licenses that we had secured, and the revenue model that we had built. So if you wanted to build like whatever, a music quiz or some other kind of niche application that you would never be able to go to the labels and license the catalog for because it's just too small of a market, then you could do that on top of Spotify. So I think that way, Spotify would have remained a very small and like simple, easy to use application, and you could have tons of other sort of powered by Spotify applications sitting on top of the system. Now that's not what happened, but yeah.
So a follow-up on the previous question. Regardless of the quality provided by Spotify, don't you think that these extra features that Spotify has now is what got it to where it is now?
I think some of them did. I mean, a lot of the things have also been rolled out and then rolled back. So Spotify is testing things, which I think is great. But I don't know if there's any like one specific feature that was, that like people would not have used Spotify without. I think the killer feature was I can search for any music and it starts playing within a second. I think the one maybe exception to that, the one thing that he have added, which I think is really, really important and that we were very, very bad at in the beginning, and now Spotify is actually very good at it, is recommendations. So I think, Spotify has built a great internal like music recommendation team, and they also acquired a company called Econest a few years back, which was arguably the best in the industry at music analysis. So like with that acquisition and the internal team, I think they've built one of the best music recommendation services on the market, and it used to be really, really bad. So that's one addition I think that does matter, because eventually it's great to be able to search for any music you like, but also sometimes you sit down and don't really know what you want to listen to and just want to be fed something.
What would you like to say for people who pirate songs, who use like pirated songs?
I don't mind. Like when we built Spotify, we didn't try to kind of. The intention wasn't to kind of replace piracy. Like I know a lot of music services were, especially music services started by insiders. They were like, oh, we're going to, like, our mission is to destroy piracy. We didn't care about that at Spotify. At least I didn't at all. Like I don't mind if people pirate music. It's up to them. But what we did was we actually compared ourselves to the file sharing services, and that was our benchmark, rather than the other commercial services, which I don't think were very good. So that's also why it was so important to Spotify to have a free service, because that's like people were already listening to music in 2006, right? It wasn't new. Everyone was listening to music online, but 98% of that music wasn't paid for. No one was paying for that. People were getting from the file sharing networks. So that's rather than competing with other commercial players for those 2% who were paying for music, we wanted to compete with the file sharing networks for those 98% who weren't paying for music. So that's what Spotify tried to do, and I think it succeeded. I think in Sweden we probably had like peak music piracy less than 2 years after Spotify launch. Now hardly anyone pirates music anymore, because it's just not worth it, right? It's either you use the free service to listen to a few ads, or you pay like $10 a month and you get rid of the ads. You can use the mobile product. For most people, that's like a better proposition than the file sharing networks. And for those who don't think so, it's like I don't mind. Keep pirating.
Hi. I'm sure there are too much ideas here, and many people who have great ideas that want to make it a reality. So give us, please, your advice how to confirm or convert our idea into something real and successful.
So how do you go from idea to like product? Is that the question? Or?
Yeah. And your advice how to make it a success.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, like you say, a lot of people have ideas. I think ideas are cheap. It's execution that really matters. It's easy to come up with an idea. It's very hard to turn it into a successful company. And I don't know if there's like generic advice. Just go and do it, I would say. Like build a prototype, build a team, raise some money, try your product in the market, see if it works, iterate if it doesn't, until you have a product that there's a good market for, and then grow it. It's not like one silver bullet. It's a lot of hard work.
I would like to ask you about SoundCloud. It's not quite similar to Spotify, but is a great music platform. Yeah. But now it's suffering financially big time. What do you think about Spotify?
Yeah, I love SoundCloud. Eric and Alex, the founders, are good friends. They're incidentally they're also from Sweden, though they moved specifically to Berlin to start SoundCloud, which I think was great for that company, that product. I love SoundCloud. I wish they would have found a way to let SoundCloud remain what it was originally, because I think, but it's like back to the music industry. The music industry is forcing SoundCloud into becoming something like more like closer to what Spotify is, and I think that's the entirely wrong direction for SoundCloud to go. A lot of the music that was like that made SoundCloud unique has been taken down because it wasn't like, you know, a lot of mashups and mixtapes and all of that stuff. They didn't have a license for, but it's because it's impossible to get a license for that. Like, how do you license a mashup? There's just no way. That's like, music industry doesn't work like that. But it also means they're just, you know, putting like a big stop sign on a lot of cultural expression. So I think that's very unfortunate. I don't know what the future of SoundCloud is going to be. I do hope they find a way to kind of get back to what they were and still, you know, do that as a profitable business that's sustainable. If they don't, probably someone else will. Because there's demand for it, whether the music industry likes it or not.
For me, one of the biggest the biggest thing about Spotify for me that makes it such a great product is curation, and how smart the playlists have become in introducing you to new music. But I get that that's not possible without gathering tremendous amounts of data first, right, on the users. So how do you ensure that you have a product that lasts long enough and you grow your user base for long enough to actually reach the point where you're offering such a unique service?
So I think part of it, so there's two types of curation that happens at Spotify, right? There's the algorithmic one, and yeah, that requires some data. And then there's like you have like human creators that create playlists by hand, and that you don't need a lot of data for. You just need experienced like music people. So that you can do without any data. But I don't know, like, it seems like you're asking, like, what if you go into the industry now? How do you compete? I don't think it's a good industry to go in now. I don't see why anyone would start a music streaming service now. It doesn't make sense. You could argue it didn't make sense 10 years ago either, because it's like such a difficult space. And I personally have promised myself I will never work in the content industry again, because it's just a horrible industry. And it's actually a quite small industry. Like the global market for music is not that big. It's like a few $10 billion. It's not a big market. So I don't see why anyone would go into that market now and try to compete.
Hi. I've been living in New York for 7 years and using Spotify, and now I moved back to Lebanon 2 months ago. And I think it's unfortunate because I had to create another account on Deezer and redo all my playlists. So I was wondering why Spotify is not accessible here and if they plan on being so.
So specifically why it's not accessible here and what the plans are, I have no idea. The reason it's not accessible in most countries in the world is that it's in 60 markets, which leaves about 200 countries unaddressed, is because it just takes a long time. So part of that is just the company's own internal prioritization, like where can we make the most money. Part of it is also, there's a lot of countries that Spotify have been wanting to go into that still took a long time, like Germany is one example. And that was because the local collecting society that you need to acquire a license from they just didn't want to license streaming services. So that probably delayed like the German launch with, I don't know, like 3-4 years. So it's a mix of internal prioritization and whatever the local situation is with licenses. But I think what you should have done, rather than cancel your Spotify and sign up for Deezer, is just to keep your American credit card and keep paying with that. Yeah. Then you could have kept your Spotify. And there's also a service, I forget the name, but you can Google it, that lets you like port your playlists between different music services. You don't need to recreate them. You sign up with like both your accounts. So you can just transfer your playlists.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can use a VPN, but if you have an American credit card, you don't even need to do that. You just keep paying, and you can sign in from anywhere.
It was impossible to do that because when they saw that I'm in Lebanon, it wasn't working anyway. Even with my
Spotify. That's surprising.
Yeah, even with my American credit card.
Oh, that's surprising.
Yeah.
Well, then you have to use a VPN. There's one question over here. I'm not sure at all about the order.
Do you think that Spotify will make an offline version for smartwatches? Because when I'm running or something.
Right, yeah. I mean, now with the Apple Watch 2, I suppose you could. I'm not sure. I haven't kept up enough. And if anyone else in the audience is like an iOS developer and knows the answer, feel free to kind of step in. But I'm not sure if Apple has opened up the Watch OS enough for anyone to do that. You can have your Apple music on your watch, but I don't know if anyone else could do that. And for Android watches, I'm not sure either. It's probably more open. I think if it's, as long as it's like technically possible, and it like, I don't know if either how it would affect like the battery times of your watch, but as long as there are no technical reasons not to do it, I'm sure it will come out eventually.
What advices would you give for a startup CTO? Like, what are the main points that I personally have to focus on?
Sure. I think don't over-engineer things too early. Like, don't try to build a huge scalable system before you have any users. Just get something out there as fast as possible to the market and see if it works. If it doesn't work, you're going to have to change things. And if it does work and you get a lot of new users, that's a good problem to have. Like, then you can focus on scaling it. So yeah, just get something out quickly and see if anyone really wants it, because that's the biggest problem for most startups. They build and build and build, and then they launch, and then they don't get any traction.
So we have to do it like a SAP.
Like a
SAP as soon as
yeah. As soon as I build an MVP, like a minimum viable product, get it out, see if it works, and then iterate until you have something, and then grow. One question in the back.
When Netflix had licensing issues, they started creating their own content. Do you think that that is a possible model for the music streaming industry?
Not really. I mean, you see a little bit of that, not exactly creating their own content, but you see, as I said, as an answer to another question, like some players more than others are trying to get exclusive deals and use that as their competitive advantage, which I think is unfortunate. Going to the point where you start to kind of commission your own music, I think is unlikely. Music doesn't really work that way. Like a movie you watch once, typically. You rarely watch a movie again. Sure, it happens, but you rarely watch a movie more than once. So it's like, but music, I don't know, you kind of, it is a much more, while I said before, no one has been able to build like a good online music social service, like the music we choose to listen to though is very social. Like we want to listen to the music that's on the radio, that everyone else listening to, that people are talking about and writing about. And if it's exclusive to one platform, I think it's not going to get the same, I don't think it's going to have the same impact. And I also think it's very hard for a company like, Spotify is a technology company at its core, it's not a music company. And for Spotify to try to kind of predict what people want to listen to and commission that music, I think it would be very hard. I don't think it would be successful. So I definitely hope they don't try to do that. I can't hear you. There's a mic coming.
Not to mention the cost of launching a new artist. There's publicity.
There's huge marketing campaign, and yeah, that's not an industry that I think Spotify should go into. One question here. Yeah.
Do you see Spotify, does it have a possibility of ever becoming its own record music label?
So that's sort of the same question, not exactly like commissioning music, but like actually signing up artists directly. That I think is like less unlikely. It's a very difficult, like Spotify has to walk like a thin path between making it as easy as possible for artists to kind of get their music on Spotify, but also not to be seen as competing with the labels too much, because Spotify needs like to be in good standing with the labels, because they're the ones that own the content that Spotify depends on. So if Spotify starts signing up its own artists, I think that might be bad for those relationships. The direction that Spotify has been pushing artists in, which I think is a good one for everyone actually, is to get on one of the aggregators. So there's now several services where you can essentially just sign up, you pay a small fee, you can upload your music, and then they get your music on all of the streaming services. So as an artist, you probably don't want to be only on Spotify either, right? You want to be on all of them. And then you can remain independent. You don't need a record label to kind of tell you what to do. You are in control of your own music, and you can still get distribution on all of the platforms. And yeah, so I think that's the way to go.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay, last one.
Last question.
Ich spreche Deutsch auch, aber nur ein bisschen. So
Session.
I'll say my question in English. The first question was, why did you leave Spotify? So I wanted to ask the reverse. Why did you join? What was your goal, and how did it start for you?
Sure. So if you're, I'll be telling a little bit more about like the story around Spotify and the other startups I've done. I think at like 2 something later this afternoon. So feel free to join that talk. It's on the big stage. But quickly, so I was working in another startup called Stardoll. So we were doing like online paper dolls. Our target audience was girls aged like 7 to 12 who were playing with these online dolls. And it got pretty big. We had like 200 million users and like 1 billion page views eventually. But I was working there initially as a developer and then as an engineering manager. And Daniel, who's one of the co-founders of Spotify, he was consulting with that company as its CTO. He had previously sold a contextual ad targeting company to like a Swedish sort of commission junction clone or double-click clone. So he'd made some money. He was trying to think about what to do next and kind of thinking about what would eventually become Spotify. So he was consulting there. I was working there. We got to know each other. We started talking about what was eventually going to become Spotify in like the spring of 2006. And then he and a co-founder started it, and they asked me to join as the CTO there. So that's how I ended up there. Okay, thank you very much. Great questions.